So you've already seen this famous Polish king from Matt's talk today, but basically these were the descriptions of his kidneys. So he died unexpectedly young. He was quite a successful king, but at the autopsy, this is what his kidneys were described to be like that of a bull. So, and we think that probably in retrospect, he probably was the first recorded case of polycystic kidney disease. So how common is this? This is data from the UK. So we're looking at, we have a national registry to sort of say how many patients develop kidney failure because of PKD. And PKD is now the third most common cause of kidney failure within the UK. And it's around 1 in 10 people who develop kidney failure have got PKD as the underlying cause. Now, I think, as Ross alluded to, how common it is within the general population is not clear. So estimates of about 1 in 500 to 1 in 2,500 have been mentioned. And the reason for that is that it depends what you're talking about. So if you test people genetically, maybe 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 people carry the faulty gene, PKD1 or PKD2. But probably half of them at least don't know they've got the disease. So people are walking around, probably have some cysts, but no symptoms. And as some of you will know, many people present without symptoms. So that's the difference. So there are probably a lot more people out there with PKD than we know. The numbers are about 70,000 in the UK, and probably about up to 8 million people worldwide. But it could be more, could be slightly less. It affects all ethnic groups. It's not just in Western populations. It's been recorded in every population described. Now, apart from kidney problems, what other problems could you get? So you could get problems with blood pressure. You could get quite commonly to get pain in the kidneys, and that's often neglected. And about 20% get more problems with the liver, polycystic liver disease, and about 3 to 10% have a risk of these aneurysms rupturing. So that's basically, it's not just a kidney disease. So I would hope that whoever doctor you sees will ask, you that, do you have any problems outside your kidneys? Okay, so, and currently at the moment, until recently, the best practice in terms of managing patients with polycystic kidney disease was what we call supportive. So we kind of treat blood pressure when it's there. We have gotten urine infection, we treat that. Any kind of complications, we treat those. But there's nothing you could do to alter the course of disease. But as you've heard already this morning, tolvaptan is the first drug that's been shown to make a difference to extending the life of the kidney. So briefly about some things you've heard about already today. Don't need to spend a lot of time because Jackie's already talked about genetics. It's amazing to think that actually it's only 30 years ago that we first recognized that there were 2 genes for PKD. So they call PKD1. This is the gene cartoon. It's a much bigger gene than PKD2. And these are the proteins that it makes. So basically, this is a very large one, and this is a very small one. So I've spent about 30 years trying to study what they do, and we're still not sure exactly what they do. We're still working on it. Anyway. So how do we actually manage PKD currently? So I think this is fairly standard around the country and around the world. So we make the diagnosis by ultrasound. You've heard this word prognosis, which just means, what's going to happen in the future to you as an individual. And it's sort of, most people will say, well, we don't know, actually. You've got PKD, but we don't know what's going to happen. Everyone's different. And then obviously in the past, there was no treatment, but now we have tolvaptan. So what's going to happen, I think, in this decade, I think we're going to see increasingly the use of genetic testing, because you already heard that the cost of that is getting a lot less, and basically it's a lot more easily available, at least in the NHS. So we're going to see that used much more and I think there is some utility in that in terms of making the diagnosis, particularly when the scans are still normal and you're not sure whether your cysts going to develop later. I'm going to show you some evidence that knowing the type of gene that you have and the gene fault may also have some benefit in terms of telling you how good your kidney is going to do. But also there's a technique using MRI scanning. So Dr. Sims mentioned using MRI. So this is a magnetic resonance imaging. You go into a machine, a big magnet. It takes pictures of you without X-rays and enables us to calculate the size of the kidneys, or more accurately, the volume of the kidneys. And we're able to use that information to give you a score. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I think, I believe we will have tolvaptan, but we'll have something else. So we'll have combination treatment. Those who can't take tolvaptan take something else, but some people might benefit from having 2 drugs, but we're not there yet. Okay, so I think these are kind of my big headlines, and I think these are the 3 kind of challenges for what the future holds. I think firstly, it's kind of very obvious, but I think across the country, across the world, we need to have a new standard of care. So I don't think the standard of care is equal in depending on where you live and where you see your doctors. We should have a standard, wherever you go in the country, whether it's in Scotland or, in Sheffield, you'll have the same standard of care. Now, there's a group working internationally to try to establish that this should be the standard for everyone, every patient, wherever you are. Secondly, you've heard this issue about personalized medicine. So we're not all the same, thankfully, but we're not also one size fits all. It's not like one approach will work for everyone. So we're kind of into the era of what suits you at this particular time in your life, and how do we address that? So I'll say a little bit about that, and obviously, finally, to end with better and safer treatments. I think we do need better treatments, and we also need safer treatments than tolvaptan. So implementing a new standard of care. So this is kind of like the dream, really. So this is the patient pathway. So I think at the moment, it's fair to say that most people have the experience of going to a doctor, could be a nephrologist, and they say, yeah, you've got PKD. And then you say to the doctor, what doctor, is there anything you can do about it? They say, not really. What's going to happen to me? I don't know. Go back to your GP. Come back when your kidney function is 20%. We can give you a transplant. Got a very good transplant surgeon. Mr. Shrestha will do it for you. So, there's a kind of a lot of lack of information. There's a lot of misinformation as well, because I have patients coming to me say, well, I always thought it's only passed on by only to the women. So only women get that. And it misses a generation because so-and-so didn't have it. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I think we need to kind of like have a standard sort of, this is you got PKD, this is what you got to know, this is what's going to happen, and so on. So I think I would sort of split this. You're not meant to read all of this. This is kind of more for a leisurely read. But I would say, first visit, information, okay, but not too much because you'll be overwhelmed. Something to read, and we'll talk about that. And then the second visit, we'll talk about screening. So we talk about screening for other complications apart from the kidney, because we know it affects other organs, but also talk about screening family. So, I come from a big family. No one else has known to got PKD. Should they be screened? Should my children be screened? So lots of things to think about. And these are some of the things to think about. And finally, a third visit to think about treatment. Should I be treated for, should I have tolvaptan? Should I not have tolvaptan? If I don't have tolvaptan, what are the options? Anything else I can do? So you can imagine if you take this approach, it's going to take time. We're very, very busy in clinics. So, doctors don't have time. So I think what I think we're advocating for is that there should be specialist clinics for PKD patients, so that you can come talk to a specialist who knows what they're talking about, and then have the time to explain things and go through things. And obviously, this is I'm thinking that not all centers can have the same level of expertise, but you could have sort of 1 or 2 centers that are truly super specialized, but other centers have some basic information. They can refer to a super specialized center, but every hospital should at least have a basic set of rules to follow, okay? And then obviously we would link to hospitals around the world and around the country to share expertise. Now, this is a simpler one, and I think this is really, really helpful. This is called a patient route map. which is being devised by the PKD International, which I think the PKD Charity is a founder member of, and the European ADPKD Forum, which is a group of patients and doctors who come together to kind of draw up this route map. It's available online for free, and it's quite user-friendly. So you can click on there, and the bubble expands, and you can look up something. So this is actually like a map to help you navigate through your journey. Because once you got PKD, it's going to be with you for life. And it takes you right from the time you're diagnosed right to transplantation or dialysis. So every bubble, if you click on that, will give you information. So I highly recommend it. You don't need a lot of computer skills, and it's not a very high-powered computer, but it's really, really useful. So do play with that. If you need a link, probably you can go to the charity as well. Okay, so I recommend that. Okay, so what about, so that's hopefully, wherever you live, wherever you work, you're going to get the same standard of care, and around the world as well. So advancing personalized medicine. So this is some data that we collected from the Sheffield cohort. So I think we've been running the PKD clinic for about 12 years now. So in about 2013, so when we were running it for about 3 years or so, we decided to say, okay, ask the question, how are people coming to us? How did their disease first present? And so one of my trainees at the time decided to look at all 200 patients that we were seeing at the time. We now have about 600. So how do people come to attention? So if you like, very briefly, 1/3 come by screening. So they know there's a family history. So they say, at some stage, they say, could I be scanned to know whether I've got it or not? About a 6 come incidentally. So they come because they had a scan for something else, maybe irregular periods or sort of, they did a bit of bloating, and then suddenly the report polycystic kidneys, please refer. So about sort of just about 60% come from this, but the rest have a variety of symptoms. So they might have urine infection, or might pass blood, or have unexplained pain. Or in the older population, it's because the doctor's done a blood test and got a fright and said, oh gosh, kidney function is only 20%. Quick, send to nephrology or scan. And then they say, oh, polycystic kidneys, refer. So, it's come by chance because the person has had no symptoms. So what we found, perhaps not surprisingly, the younger patients tend to be picked up by screening because they know about the family history. They come forward. Older patients come because they have been sent by the GP. The GP's found they have high blood pressure, kidney function is not normal, refer to nephrology, scan polycystic kidneys. So these are the age. Between the genders, between males and females tend to present more with pain, unexplained pain, GP sees scans, and males tend to present more with passing blood. And that's perhaps not surprising because males don't have periods, right? So as far as I know. So I think women, if they have blood in the urine, they might think it's a period. If a male passes blood in the urine, they think, oh gosh, something's wrong, okay? Okay, so you've seen this slide already from Jackie this morning, but basically, you've got to get used to looking at this type of graph, but basically this is a graph looking at, say, 0 to 100% kidneys working, and this is age. So depending on the gene fault that you carry, the average age at which your kidneys stop working is different. So if you carry PKD2, you're the best. 80 years is the average. So these are all averages. So each line represents an average. So within the average, there's a lot of variation, which is not on the graph. Whereas if you carry PKD1, it's much earlier, but depending on the type of mutation you carry, it also puts you into a high-risk group, an intermediate risk group, or a low-risk group. Now, you could ask that question, if you had your gene mutation, which risk group do I fall into? Okay, so now the same group, this French group that actually did this nice study, then used this information and said, okay, can we improve the prediction beyond just the genetics? So can we add information to this? So what they found, they came up with a score. So this is called the pro-PKD score, or prognosis in PKD. So prognosis, you remember that word is about the future, telling how the kidneys are going to do. So by adding the genetic score to whether you're male or female, and whether you have blood pressure or symptoms before the age of 35, they come up with a score of 1 to 9. So if you fall into this group 1 to 3, you would be considered low risk. If you fall into 7 to 9, you would be high risk. And if you fall into the blue line, you're in between, all right? So now I want you to look at this dotted line. So this dotted line that I've drawn here is actually the average age at which kidneys stop working for all PKD patients. So let's say, actually, it's between 58 and 60, but 58, all right? So at the age of 58, sort of only 20% in the high-risk group would still have functioning kidneys, okay? Whereas in the intermediate risk group, about 50% are still functioning at the age of 58. But if you look at the lowest risk group, it's 80%. Now, 80% is not 100%, so 20% kidneys have already gone. So do you see what I mean? It's about averages. So it depends whether you are Mr. or Miss Average. But if you're not, you know, it could, even if you fall into the lowest risk group, you still may, at the age of 58, 60, kidneys would not be working. I hope that makes sense, all right? So, but it enables us to stratify people into risk groups just based on genetics. And this is what I think both Dr. Sims and Dr. Cook referred to, that actually it's not all about genetics, because within the family, there's a lot of variation. So this is a study we did, again, from that same paper in 2013, about 9 years ago, looking at within each family where we had at least 2 individuals whose kidneys had failed and had to require dialysis or a transplant. And now you predict that if it was purely genetics, then you would be the same. The age at which your kidneys fail will be exactly the same. But as you can see from these 27 families, it can be quite close, or it can be extremely variable. And these are people carrying the same mutation. So every individual is different. So genetics is not the only answer. It's one of the pieces of information. So within the family, we see big differences. I think so that variability also extends to the fact that actually we're now recognizing that although ADPKD was first described in adults, we now recognize it can happen throughout life. So I think Jackie mentioned that it can present in infants and children under very special situations. Often the baby or the child has inherited 2 mutations rather than 1 from both parents, even if one of them is not sufficient to cause disease by itself, but in combination it leads to worse disease. To some of the new genes where the disease tends to be late, it tends to be, you know, when you're over 60, and, you know, and so on. As we live longer, we probably pick up more, and they tend not to cause the kidneys to fail, but your kidneys are nevertheless full of cysts. So clearly, when we're thinking about ADPKD, the age itself is not the answer. So you can present at any age. Oh, hi. Sorry. Yes.
You mean present, don't you? I think we get quite a lot of questions from people who don't quite understand that the disease is
okay.
they're born
picked up later. So I think almost definitely cysts can occur from the time you are conceived, but it can occur at every point throughout life. But the stage at which it's picked up can be later. All right. So, okay. Thanks, Jane. So I think, again, you know, we started off 30 years ago knowing about 2 genes, and now it's a kind of a whole family of genes. The common theme being they all can cause some form of polycystic kidney disease. Some are more severe than others. So currently in common practice, we probably would test for something like 8 genes. That can cause some form of polycystic kidney disease. And I think Joanne was mentioning that, what about our family? And I think, with the rarer conditions, it you have the faulty gene, you have a few cysts, but they tend not to cause the kidneys to fail. It's never 100%, but very, very, very unusual. So the kidneys are still working. So that's not the problem, but they're still full of cysts. So these are just some of the candidates, and there will be more, because the more genetic testing we do, the more we'll find, okay? But anyway, these are just some of them. So I don't expect you, there's no test at the end to say, do you remember how many genes were there on that slide, right? Okay. Oh, there will be a test, sorry, yeah, okay. So, but I mean, so I've told you that genetics is kind of useful. I think it's useful to stratify you into different groups, but it's not the whole answer. Is there a better way? So a second way is to use the actual volume of the kidneys, what we call the total kidney volume. So we get the right kidney, the left kidney, we add them, we got the total kidney volume, and that gives us a number. All right, and this is just a kind of an image that's been colored with red where the cysts are, but the blue is the kind of non-cystic. It just shows you what it might look like on the scan. So some scientists and doctors in the US have done this sort of kind of study, and they've actually come up with something useful. I think probably if I was to choose between genetics and the imaging, I would choose the imaging. But in the UK, you don't have to choose; you can have both, right? So, but if you have to pay, then clearly I would pay for the scan. So you can look at the. So what they did was that they looked at all their patients. You know, this is at the Mayo Clinic. So the first thing you go to the Mayo Clinic is that you go straight before you see a doctor. You have all these scans. So by the time you see the doctor, he has all the scans. Yeah, it's just different world. So. Badri knows. So basically, they looked at all the patients where they had at least 2 scans of at least separated by 1 year apart. So they could say between this point and this point, the kidneys have grown by this much. And then they'd been followed on for like 10 to 15 years. So they also knew what happened to them in terms of their kidney function. All right. So what they found after kind of a lot of calculation was that you could separate people according to the rate at which their kidneys grew as they got older. So, and to cut a long story short, there are 5 categories. So I talked about genetics having 3 categories, but they have 5 categories, and they call them 1A, B, C, D, E, right? So essentially, 1A and 1B would be considered slow. I mean, it's not that it's not moving, but it's moving much slower. Whereas 1C, D, and E would be called fast. So 1C to E means your kidneys are growing up at least 3% per year to over 6% per year. So some of them are growing like 10% per year, so very, very fast. And basically, these groups, C, D, E, would be considered rapid growth, higher risk. 1A, 1B would be slower growth, lower risk, okay? So if you use this kind of classification, there's only 2 groups. There's low risk and there's high risk, okay? So the nice thing about this is that if I did a scan on you and I knew your height and I did a scan, say you were 35, we could then say, okay, you fall into your kidneys factored by your height, puts you into class 1A or B or C or D or E at the same age. Can you see? Because at each age, there's a lot of variation. And essentially, the patients who, so Matt talked about who should have tolvaptan, and clearly the best evidence is that what has gone on before. So if your kidney function is declining by more than 3% per year, if you like, over 5 years, we know that you are classified as rapid. But if, say, for example, you came to see me today and we didn't have that information, is there any other way? So one way is to do a scan. Then we could say, where do you fall on this line? And do you fall into the high-risk group? So if you fall in the high-risk group, you'll be offered tolvaptan. Okay. If you didn't have a scan or whatever, and you had genetics instead, we could use the genetic score, the so-called pro-PKD score, which also separates you then into 3 groups, low, intermediate, and high. All right. So these are ways of kind of adjusting risk. And the reason for that is that obviously, as I said to you, each of us is individual. So we need to know not just the risk to you from the family mutation, but actually you as a person, because unless you have an identical twin, you're going to behave differently, right? To your sister, your father, your brother. So, okay. So what else is going on? So basically, going back in history, so basically this is a very ancient practice called uroscopy. So doctors used to take bits of urine, look at the light and say, you've got this, you've got PKD, or you got heart disease or whatever. So you can tell this ancient description where I guess this is a patient whose urine's full of blood and this one isn't. So you can tell he's got PKD. But also evolved into a kind of a bit of a science, really, because they had these charts where, depending on the color of the urine and the light, and you could actually tell them what disease you have. Okay, so I'm kind of, making fun of this, but actually, strangely enough, we're going back to urine, but we're using modern techniques to look at urine to say, does the urine tell us anything about the kidney? That's more than we have from the imaging or the genetics. So basically, so this is as an example. So we did a study published about 2 years ago where we did exactly that. We took healthy volunteers, patients with early disease with PKD, late disease, and also patients without PKD, took the urine, looked at the little particles in the urine that we all make all the time. We were able to identify using specialized techniques parts of the genes that are don't normally make products, and we're able to kind of analyze this and come up with some ideas about whether this helps you to make you a patient who's more likely to progress or less likely to progress. So we're kind of continuing this work with further funding, and the hope is that we would at least have a test from the urine that is as good as taking pictures, better than genetics, or maybe it would add value to that. So I guess we're not sure whether it will outperform the scans or not, but we hope that it will actually improve precision. Okay, so as an example, there are other people doing different types of work, but looking at urine, because the urine is one good thing about the kidney is that you can get a lot of information from the urine. Okay, I guess the other way of thinking about personalizing medicine is actually not about drug treatment, about, I would say this is how probably most doctors think about it, the right drug to the right person at the right time, okay? But actually, there's another way of looking at it and say, actually, what do you want? I don't think probably as doctors we're very good at that. Probably you walk into a room and it's kind of one-way traffic, you should have this, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. Hopefully that's not your impression, but I do feel sometimes it's a one-way conversation. And sometimes maybe, it should be, okay, we can do lots of things, but what do you want? Okay, and what is your problem? Because basically, I think, again, in medical practice, we don't ask that enough. So this is a study that actually we did to ask that sort of thing, is that actually we ask our patients what's going on in their lives apart from their GFR or, symptoms, what's actually going on. So this is a study that Ros did actually when she was still a trainee. Based on the Sheffield cohort. So again, from patients I know well, some of you probably have filled in this questionnaire. So this is a kind of what we call a quality of life type of questionnaire, looking at sort of how people feel about their disease and how they're living with it, rather than whether they have pain or whether they have blood in the urine. And so basically, these are, again, I'm not expecting, there's no multiple choice at the end about which is the right answer, but just for the sake of time, this is all published and available. There are three that we noted that were kind of standing out as people saying we agree more than we disagree. So red is agree, blue is disagree, and the gray is that I can't decide. So the top three, I have more problems in my life. So many people said I have more problems because I have PKD. Now, we don't know what the problems are, but clearly people perceive that their life is more complicated. Secondly, a concern about developing kidney failure. So many people are probably very afraid of kidney failure and what that means for them. I think particularly where in the family someone else has had kidney failure, a mum or a dad or an aunt, and the experience has been bad. So people are quite frightened about that and they don't want to think about it, but it's something that came up. And finally, this issue, which I think is probably under discussed because we're embarrassed to talk about it, I feel guilty about passing on to my children. So in this anonymous questionnaire, people were willing to say that. So 6 out of 10 people said, I feel guilty about that. But what have you done about it? Have you able to talk about it with someone? How is it affecting your relationships and so on? So clearly we picked up things that we didn't expect entirely. And I would say that perhaps in a kind of a care going forward, we should sort of ask people more what actually is going on, what they're thinking, rather than just measuring their bloods, okay? Then the second study we did publish more recently this year was a European study. So we collected about 460 patients from a large European study. So Sheffield was the UK site, 6 centers. So these are the centers around Europe because it was a European funded study. And we looked at all patients with kidney function of at least greater than 30. So patients with stage 1 to 3 disease, if you like, CKD disease. They filled in a questionnaire and we looked at, what were the results. So these are the characteristics of the patients. So most patients about almost equal gender difference, relatively young, early 40s, average age, and most people with kidneys are still 70 to 80% functioning. So I think the thing that was really striking was that basically we looked at the frequency of pain, comparing those. So about a third reported pain in the kidneys, and 2/3 reported no pain. Now, if we look at this graph, so this is what we call a radar plot, and basically it's a way of looking at information, complex information, simply. So if you like, the closer you are to the outside, it means that you do better. The closer you are to the inside, you do worse. So this is about quality of life and the symptoms you have. So we found that actually all these are what we call significant. So they're significantly different between the two groups. So patients, obviously 1/3 reported pain. That seems quite high to me. And the patients who had pain had a poorer quality of life. So these were not patients who had treated for pain. They just said we had pain. When we looked at how that affected, for example, sleep, social interaction, sexual function, all kinds of things about quality, they reported poorer quality of life. So again, I would say probably if you have pain and it's affecting your life, you should tell your doctors, okay? And we don't ask for it, but maybe we should ask more routinely. It's a kind of important thing to how you live with disease, really. So, okay. So I think just 2 examples of how I think care needs to change. So finally, better and safer treatment. So we've got tolvaptan, but do we need anything else? I think the answer is yes. But this is the reason why we are using tolvaptan. So the next 3 slides to show you the sign. So this is how a drug that was kind of like the precursor of tolvaptan was tested in mice. So these are polycystic mice. They carry a mutation, the PKD2 gene. And you can see that when the investigators did the study, they were probably fell off their chair. You could see, this is the untreated mouse at 15 weeks, and this is after treatment. And this is just looking at the whole kidney without cutting it. So you can imagine why they were so excited about it. They then did a human study. So this was the TEMPO study that Matt referred to. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but basically this graph shows you the results of kidney volume. So we measure the kidney volume over time with treatment or without treatment, and looking at kidney function with or without treatment. So the main thing is to notice that the blue line is less sleep than the red line. So the blue line is treated group. The red line is the untreated group or placebo, sugar pill. And kidney function, again, declines less sharply if you're on tolvaptan compared to sugar pill, all right? Second study, called the REPRISE study, showed more or less the same, but actually showed it in patients who had less good kidney function. Because in the first study, most patients had kidney function over 70%. So they were in the stage 1 to 2. So this was extending it to stage 3, actually a few patients in stage 4, showing that if you're on treatment just for 1 year, so this is a short study, but after very intense, your kidney function declines 30% less fast than if you were on sugar pill. So that's why we use it, because it does work. And I think hopefully Matt has shown you again that even in our kind of normal practice, we can show that some people do benefit that from just Claire. So, okay, so in the last few slides, just to kind of talk about how we're thinking about drug development. Very simply, we can think of how cysts arise in the kidney from the genetic fault. Basically, the cysts, if you like, how are cysts born and how do cysts grow? So if we can stop cysts from being born, then we may have a cure. Tolvaptan is not the cure, but we may have a cure. We can understand this process of what's called cyst initiation, but essentially how do they start in the first place? But once they've got there, can we stop them from growing? I suspect that tolvaptan is probably having more of an effect on the second part, maybe a little bit on the first, but clearly not enough to stop cysts from forming. So this is just some example. So this is quite a few years ago now, but one of the key things that does occur in the polycystic kidney is that the cells divide much more often than they should. So in some ways like cancer, but not like cancer in the sense that it doesn't kill you like a cancer does and spread everywhere. But definitely the cells they divide more than they should. And that's why your kidneys get bigger. They've got more and more cells when they should not be dividing. So many of the treatments have tried to target, can we stop the cells from dividing? But at the moment, the only one that is working is tolvaptan. And that's working through this chemical, suppressing this chemical called cyclic AMP. But other trials like somatostatin, this compound which targets this enzyme, these, again, compounds that target this enzyme, and this one that targets this enzyme have all failed. So it's not for want of trying. People are trying really hard, but at the moment, the only success story is tolvaptan. But a lot of things have been tried, or are being tried. The second thing is about, can we stop the cysts from growing? And here, the basic concept is that, cysts are full of fluid. So can we stop the fluid getting in? And if we can stop that, then maybe we can keep them small, stop them from getting so big and damaging the kidney. So that's the basic concept. Again, a few things are being tried or have been tried. So the only thing that works is tolvaptan. So the others have failed, or there are a few others that are kind of being developed as future trials, like metformin, which is a drug used in diabetes, but it's thought to may have some effect in this. But so we will wait to see. The reports will be coming probably in a couple of years' time. Okay. And to make it even more complicated, so these are just a list of some of the things. So when we looked at what could be targeted in terms of drug development, a few years ago, there were about 14 different drugs that we could target. The list is a lot more now. Probably I would say it's about 30 to 40. So certainly there is no shortage of drug targets. The question is, can we actually take it all the way through, like tolvaptan, from mice into man, and works? Because a lot of things work well in mice, but unless you're a mouse, no good. If you're a mouse, great. We've got lots of treatment for mice. So, any mice in the room? Okay. So, and then just to expand the thing about genetics again. So basically, you've heard about genotype and phenotype. So genotype is your genetic makeup, and particularly in this case, it's your gene mutation that causes disease. And the type of mutation and the diseases, and then what happens with your disease. You get big kidneys, small kidneys, whatever. But it turns out that actually there are many, many things that affect this. And that's why it's not as straightforward. You carry this gene in this family, you're going to behave exactly the same. There are lots and lots of things. Got other genes, for example, including these, what we call non-coding RNAs, which is what I was telling you about. We measure in the urine to see whether that can add some value. There are also environmental factors that we don't understand. For example, I don't think it's clear whether smoking itself makes the disease worse. It's bad for you anyway, but coffee, for example, or pollution, does that make any difference? But gender makes a difference. So guys, if you males do worse in everything. If you got kidney failure, males do worse than females. So, but I don't think we can do anything to change that. Well, there are things, but I don't recommend it. So, okay. So finally, we've come a long way. So PRI was, and again mentioned by Matt, who said that the cystic degeneration of the kidneys is illness without cure. So he was a pathologist, so that's why he only saw it after life. But it is true, we don't have, it is an illness, still we don't have a cure, but we have a treatment, which is better than having no treatment. So finally, I'd like to acknowledge people who have funded our work more recently, particularly, of course, the PKD Charity, together with Kidney Research UK, who very generously funded a new project in the lab, again, to try to develop a new drug and understand the disease better. So these are some members of my group currently and in the past, and people we work with around the world. And this is a snapshot when we tried to meet during lockdown. We had to meet by Zoom. So people were still, we were still trying to meet via Zoom. So anyway, but we're working hard, and as with many other groups around the world, to try to come up with better treatments, understand the disease better, so that patients will benefit from that. So thanks for your attention. I'll take any questions there's time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. If there's time, but if not, we can move on. You're in charge.
Thank you. What is your opinion about potentially more radical therapy ideas, things like artificial kidneys or gene editing, that kind of thing, that may be further down the line?
Okay. Artificial kidneys, do you mean sort of, what do you mean by artificial kidneys? People mean different things by that.
So essentially, I would see it as a kind of a replacement for a transplant kidney,
okay.
Something that you can implant that replaces some of your kidney function.
I think we're really, really far from that. I think we can grow very primitive kidneys in a test tube to try to understand, how kidneys form, and we can use that as a model to study whether different drugs would work. But I think to grow a mature kidney for use in the test tube, we're really, really far from that. I think it would be really exciting. We could do that, but I think we have some major breakthroughs to do before we can do that. In terms of gene editing, I think at the moment it's a difficult one for PKD because basically, so you wouldn't need to do gene editing, for example. So for example, I think Jackie talked about, so if you wanted to prevent the disease from being transmitted, you would do screening or pre-implantation diagnosis, so prevention rather than treatment. I don't think there's any ethical justification for then, trying to gene edit an embryo at the stage of before it's, grown to say correct the fault, apart from it being a kind of neat thing to do. I don't think ethically would be accepted. I guess you've heard about this Chinese doctor who claimed to have done that for something else, and then he's been put under house arrest and so on. Not recommended. I think in terms of the adult kidney, I think gene editing is difficult to envisage because basically some diseases where you can replace the gene and you don't need to replace the gene in all the cells, but only some cells, because you got a defect of an enzyme, for example. You gene edit that, you put that back in, and then that could correct the fault if you just produce a little bit of what's missing. But here you can imagine, how do you target all those cells at the right time in the right place and make sure that, you got... Gene editing also is not fully foolproof because, we suspect that there are off-target effects. So you think you're editing the gene of interest, but then you might end up mutating a key gene that could be cancer-causing, for example. So it is a very exciting technology, but I can't see it being applied for kidney diseases at the moment anyway. So.